Hi everybody, Matt Lawton here, and this is the Astrological Winds channel. Going to take a look this week at the weather report for December 16th through the 22nd. And three main things I'm going to talk about is the Sun square Neptune on Wednesday, which is a continuation of last week's new moon energy. And then we also have a very beneficial Venus trine Jupiter Thursday. And then Saturday is the solstice with the sun going into Capricorn. So I'm going to talk not only about that a little bit, but also take a look at this chart, the solstice chart set for Washington, D.C., so we can get a little bit of an idea about what might be coming up for the United States in the next quarter to the next year. In a very interesting time. But for the most part, it's a pretty quiet week, actually. So, but right before I get into that, just a little infomercial here. Astrological Winds channel is a free video blog on YouTube. Been doing it for years. If you have a YouTube account, please become a follower. Don't forget to turn on your notifications. It's also available on all kinds of podcasts. It was a podcast long before it was a YouTube channel. So Buzzsprout puts it out there. Just look it up. If you don't find it on one, try another one. I know Apple has it, and that way you don't have to watch a video if you don't want to. You can just listen to audio, which can free you up to listen to it at times that you might not be able to otherwise. Also, I do post the link on Instagram, which also the Astrological Winds channel has its own page on. So become a follower there. And you can always find it on my website, www.astrologicalwinds.com. Not only can you find that there, but you can find past blogs there. So if you need to refer back to last week's or the months, they're all embedded there under the blogs tab. That also, I have a calendar there that I do each week that shows some of the holidays and stuff like that, and some of the astronomical stuff going on. And that also has my menu for my professional services. I've been a professional astrologer for over 20 years. After 7 years of training, I would love to do your chart or someone else that you know. I have all kinds of different readings that I do. So look at the menu there. Also, always available for students. I'm looking to get a couple more students to start a live class, and also available for groups if you need a lecture, workshop. So all that stuff, check the website. I do ask, since it is a free service, that you pass the link on to somebody else you might know who might be interested in it. If you've done it before, please do it again. If you'd like to give a currency donation, there's my Cash App and Venmos. Anyone who's given me anything for this, I really appreciate. And remember, don't get stuck on the terms. If you don't know astrology well, you want to listen to the interpretations. You guys have a lot of you have a tendency to do that, especially if you have a very air kind of mind, a lot of air in your chart. You're always like, what does that mean? What does that mean? You need to listen to what the interpretation is instead of worrying about what does Mercury and Gemini mean. That's something that, can take you in off course, and then you're not hearing what the interpretation is. So make sure you do that. All right. Just a little first thing I wanted to talk about, though. I love doing little reviews of the stuff that already happened the week or two before, and show you guys poignant events that show the energy of that time. Now, I talked about Mars retrograde and what a massive thing that is, and only happens every 2+ years. And the ancient astrologers, when a planet goes retrograde, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, astronomically in the sky, it gets a lot brighter. So Mars gets a lot brighter. Now, Mars has always been associated with what? War, right? And violence, and individuals being very aggressive when it's out of balance, and going from assertiveness into aggressiveness. So when the ancient astrologers who used to observe the sky, they didn't have any other form of entertainment back then. So they would observe the sky night after night and write down events that seemed to coincide with when similar things in the sky would align. So they noticed that when Mars would go retrograde and get really bright like that, many times some leader of a kingdom or some nation would fall very suddenly, some act of violence or some surprising event, war, conquering thing. What happened as soon as Mars went retrograde? Syria fell like that, right? After years of being supported and kind of held up by Russia and Iran, suddenly they're a little spread thin doing their thing. Made the opportunity ripe as soon as Mars went retrograde. Syria fell like instantly. And not only that, the leader fell too. If it had been old days, he would have been killed. But, modern days, they got him on an airplane and got him out of there, right? And what's really mind blowing, you guys, this shows you how strong and real astrology is. Like, say, like, okay, well, Matt, Syria fell, so all these other countries didn't fall. So, like, random thing. No, Syria's chart, Pluto. Guess where it is, guys? Right where the same degree that Mars went retrograde. 7, 8 degrees of Leo. That's where Mars went retrograde. That's where Syria, in their chart, their Pluto is right at that same degree. What does Pluto represent? Death, destruction, violence, and rebirth out of that. And what has happened since then? In the 10th house, which represents the leadership, the executive leader in a mundane chart, the leader falls too. Amazing how poignant it is. That's why Syria got hit by that strongly, because the Mars went retrograde right on their Pluto. That didn't happen to other countries around it because they didn't have a planet on that critical degree, especially a planet like Pluto that represents that death and violent process of something new being born, something new transforming out of the old after a violent change like that, which is what Pluto's all about. And to top that off, Syria also has a Mars Uranus conjunction in the 8th house that was sextile. Mars retrograde sextile that. That shows how quickly Uranus this fell and how quickly the country fell and how surprising that was to everybody in the international community, the 8th house. So everybody's still trying to figure out what went over, but such a poignant type of example of how astrology works. So the first thing I want to mention this week is, remember, Mercury went direct just yesterday, the day before. So we're going to still be in heavy shadow this week, but it's starting to come out. So, things will start moving along in the Mercury world. All those things like transportation and business and communications and information and our projects will start to slowly move forward again. But we will be in the shadow period through the 2 weeks of the holidays. And I think that's really fitting because the energy of commerce and all that stuff, transportation, naturally slows down around that time. So that kind of is very fitting. But I don't think we'll have the major transportation snafus that we sometimes get when Mercury is retrograde right during the holidays. I think, we won't have some snowstorm that knocks thousands of flights off a path. It's like most likely won't happen this year. I think things will start to like chill out a little bit is the way to say it with that Mercury stuff. But remember, we will be in shadow for 2 weeks. It is very natural cycle around this time. We'll get to the other side of the year, New Year's, and we'll start to see all that activity really pick up again. Now, Monday, today, I wanted to mention just this one minor aspect. The sun is semi-square Venus. And normally I don't mention semi-squares in the blog very much. It's a more minor aspect. But the reason I mention it when the sun and Venus get together is because that's the only aspect they really get to that's a stressful aspect, because the Venus is never more than 40 some odd degrees away from the sun from our position on the earth. So when it gets to a semi-square, that's about as stressful of an aspect that the sun and Venus can have. So that's why I'd like to mention it. And what does this mainly do? It mainly affects relationships. From what I've seen over the years, we can feel really frustrated about certain relationships, and especially ones with our loved ones, with friends, or with romantic interests that we have. There's like an underlying tension in those relationships that have a tendency to get swept under the rug with this energy. People don't really say to each other what's really deeply on their minds, but yet they still have this desire to socialize and get together. So it's kind of like things are kept kind of superficial that way, and we waste a lot of time actually just kind of on stuff like that and being kind of passive and lazy and indulgent. Now, note that does fit in once again with the season. The closer we get to the holidays, and I know it's still like a week or so before it really gets in there this Monday, but at the same time, it does get us closer to that. And one of the places we really will see this is probably our credit card bills and our bank accounts. Sun semi-square Venus is wasting money on things we don't need. Well, a lot of the Christmas gifts we buy people, obviously, are things we don't need, and everything's gotten more expensive. Doesn't seem to be showing any sign of changing anytime soon, and so we're going to probably get a little bit of a surprise when we start looking at our bank account, and this also even shows that at the same time that we're putting that money out, that the money coming in from our investments is kind of slowing down too. So this is kind of like, but it can give us the inspiration to do some creative decorating in our area and environment. So that once again fits in with the holiday as well, with doing, creative decorating for the holidays. So Wednesday, we have the Sun square Neptune, which is really the most stressful aspect of the week. But I kind of talked about this a little bit last week during the full moon, because remember, Neptune was the one in the mutable T square with the full moon. So it's really very much a continuation of that energy. Now, also that same day, Venus is actually semi-square Neptune too. So two things hitting Neptune. And what is Neptune going to bring in? It's going to bring in confusion. And really, and I said this last week, what it really does is, mainly in this situation, especially with the sun, our ideals, our visions are not aligning with reality. It seems like it's very, very difficult to make our ideas and visions, no matter how in good intention they are, align with reality right now. So this is a struggle, and it can beat us down psychologically. It can be disheartening, and it can beat us down even physically. We have to be really careful of our health this week, because when we're feeling low, it opens up the energies that we may all of a sudden allow our immune systems to kind of get down, and it can bring in even disease and illness. So we have to be really careful, especially when all the holiday traveling is going on and people share their air together. The germs really get around. So you have to be really careful about like setting ourselves up for that psychologically too. We live mainly in a fantasy and dream world, and we are very inspired by what we see in our ideals and our dreams, and we will take actions on them. The square will have us taking actions, but it's kind of like trying to hold water right now. It can be very, very difficult to get any of the results that you want. And that's where the confusion can come in, So, we can still have a very romantic vision of the world and create some really beautiful environments, enjoy ourselves in nature, enjoy this time of the year. It definitely awakens our spiritual side too, but we have to be really clear with that too. We can kind of go off on tangents, once again, have unclear boundaries, become a follower a little too easily, and sometimes this is just like the pace of life too, is just so quick and stuff that it kind of beats us down a little bit too, and we get to a point where we're feeling like we can't handle everything that's going on. And then we kind of takes a little bit of a hit at our confidence and the way we kind of feel about things. So, we kind of lose a little bit of our courage, our initiative, our assertiveness to want to go out. And here's another thing, you guys, and I mentioned this last week with you too. Not a time to be deceptive. A lot of people think, oh, when things are going wrong like this, they start kind of like, oh, well, maybe I can get away with this, that, or the other thing, lies, deceit, stuff like that. Not a good time for that either, because you're going to get caught. It's going to make the waters even muddier, and damage your reputation too. I mean, it's, just the time where we kind of need to withdraw in a little bit, not get too serious about this stuff. And it is a good time for that spiritual journey too, especially this time of the year. It can get us feel very inspired and imaginative, open up our artistic creativity, our spiritual values, things like that. We have a lot of compassion that we can spread, but we have a tendency at times with the Sun square Neptune to possibly give that to people who really might not deserve it or somehow are lower with us. So we have to once again have strong boundaries even with that stuff. Now, Thursday is when the Venus trines Jupiter. Traditionally, this is the best aspect there is. The two most beneficial planets in the most harmonious aspect that can be. And this is when we can really get great benefits on all kinds of levels: abstract, physical, emotional, spiritual, through our relationships with others. People in general are very optimistic, generous, kind, enthusiastic. They want to connect with others. So going into the weekend right before the holidays really kick in, you can see this is like, connecting with family, with friends, with people you really love, and being very graceful socially, and being very gracious in the giving of the season, and enjoying the pleasures of life with our loved ones. This is a really good holiday transit and makes you feel like really content just to where you're at and in the being. So, and also any romantic interests that you may have been leading up to, this is a time where they may open up and really flow, and you may find a beautiful connection with other people that can be very beneficial for both of you. And another time too that where finances can start to flow well, your investments may start to pay off now, getting out of that Mercury retrograde where things kind of slowed down with a lot of investments. Maybe they're going to start to pay off, but we can get some financial benefits, is my point with this. But just, and also a good time for travel, which is great for holiday travels because it's best for travel for like recreational purposes. So, and then Saturday is when the sun goes into Capricorn. So that's the solstice, winter solstice up here in the northern hemisphere. Southern hemisphere is the summer solstice. And Capricorn, is the sign of wisdom. It's one of the cardinal signs, and it knows what we need to do in order to survive, what kind of systems we need to have. So it can be on the conservative side too. It can be rigid. It can be stubborn about what it believes in. And when you think about how it's related to the winter, a lot of that has to do with like just when we develop the signs of like knowing in the winter, you have to be very wise and conservative and rigid about like the rules of life and survival in order to get through the winter, both for yourself and your family and your tribe. So that's why Capricorn has this tendency to be a little on the conservative side. This is the way it's always been done. Doesn't like to stand fools, can be resistant to change, wants order, wants things, that are in order, wants to be able to feel like it's controlling things, and, can be a really excellent leader, can be like the wise old man, the wise old woman, but we have to be really careful about getting too stuck in our ways and getting dogmatic. So now what I'd like to do, I used to do this like just as a separate blog, but I'm going to just put it in here because we've got a light one. And if you can maybe zoom in on this, and I'm sorry, my printer, the blue just seems to get clogged up. I mean, there's plenty of blue in that reservoir, and it seems to get clogged up. So I don't have a lot of blue lines in there, and I tried to write some stuff in. But this is the winter solstice. Well, so winter solstice is the northern hemisphere. The solstice chart set for Washington D.C., and that's December 21st, Saturday at 4:21 a.m. And you'll see that's exactly when the sun is at 00 cap. So in mundane astrology, that is the astrology of history, politics, the leaders, countries, that kind of thing. We can look at each quarter's chart for any country, set it in their capital, the capital city of any country. You set the solstice chart there, and then you can get a good look at the flavor of the next quarter. And I believe with the solstice one for the next year too. A lot of people also believe the equinox chart coming up in the spring has a lot to do with the next year also. But I've always found the solstice chart to really work good for you. And I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years, you guys. So like, this is really good. So I just wanted to talk about a few things on this. And the first thing I want to talk about is the ascendant is Scorpio. So the first house in the ascendant is actually the state of the nation, the psyche of all of us in the United States. How are we feeling as a people, as a collective? What is our personality feeling? Wow, Scorpio, huh? We're feeling really deep right now. We're feeling really intense as a nation. We're feeling really passionate, but we're also feeling really dramatic. And why? Because there's been so many wild, crazy things that have been going on in the world and in our nation now for like really many years, really, that it's built up to a point where there's some really deep emotional processing that really needs to go on, and a lot of that it's having going to be because of secrets and things being exposed to us, and things that were hidden to us as a collective before being exposed. And a lot of this may have to do with being manipulated by those who are in power from underneath, from the shadow side. Very, very interesting, you know. So there can be a lot of anger that builds up. I mean, Scorpio builds the anger up very quick, slowly, and then it comes to a rage point and explodes. Like we had an example of that kind of energy with the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO. And this is the kind of energy that this is. This is the energy of we see. The collective sees the strings being pulled and is getting angrier and angrier and can strike out in violent kind of ways. Now, what's even more interesting, that means Mars is the ruler or lord of this chart for the next quarter, for the next year, for my opinion, the next year, but even more intensely in the quarter. And Mars, what we just know, went retrograde in Leo. So there it is up here in Leo. Guess who has Mars in Leo right on his ascendant? Our president elect. Countries and their leaders are a complete reflection of one another. The leader gets elected because that's how most people in the country actually feel, the same way that he does. So amazing that the ruler of the chart has the same Mars almost as our president elect. And his is right on his ascendant. It's integrated into his personality. Well, Mars and Leo is that very bombastic, just shoot your mouth off. I'm the boss, can be arrogant, but can also be charismatic. That is our president elect. And that is the ruler of this chart. But here's what the problem is with this: Mars is just going retrograde, and it's in the ninth house. And he's already talked about like how he wants to change Justice Department, Law Department, the courts, all this stuff, education, all this stuff that is ruled by the ninth house, our shipping and trade with other countries. All this stuff that's ruled by the ninth house is very much some of the places where he's really gone off and said he's going to make these changes. And a lot of it has to do with the belief system. Once again, ninth house that he's espousing. Now, Here's the problem. Mars is going retrograde. That means his steps are probably going backwards for the nation as a whole. That he's thinking that things are still going to work the way they used to, but the world is always changing. This is the modern world now. Now, the other thing to remember is Mars is going to retrograde back into Cancer, and it will not be leaving Cancer until almost the end of this quarter, actually. And what happens when Mars is in Cancer? It's super weak. It circles the wagons. It becomes nationalistic. It becomes patriotic. It becomes defensive. It becomes a reactionary. It becomes very emotional. It doesn't think things through, right? And a lot of the decisions already, before he's even been in office, have come back to bite him. You know, he's on the news admitting that he can't change the economy like he promised. He's putting billionaires and people who a lot of people are questioning their ability to actually man the positions that he's trying to get them to. So he's finding out like a lot of that stuff, and it's going to go back into that Cancer, and it's going to affect all of us. It's going to really shrink things, and we're going to really have to tighten things back. And I'll be honest with you too, this is a very dangerous time for us in the world too, because when Mars goes into Cancer and retrograde, and we become internalized, and we allow things that we had more influence in the world to control or dictate where it may go to kind of get out of our hands, and that could come back to bite us too. We have to be really careful. And what else is Mars doing in this chart? It's opposite Pluto and Ceres in the third house. So this shows that there's a real good chance for violence and war occurring because of the rage surrounding a lot of these issues. And with Mars ruling the fifth and sixth house, the sixth house is the house of military and the police and civil servants. So it shows they could be all called upon in this energy. And the fifth house is the house of entertainment. And you got Chiron and Eris in there, and it shows that there's going to be a battle in the media over a lot of this stuff that's going on, that's going to keep going on. But, you know, once again, remember Mercury and Sag too. There's a trine of Mars to Mercury and Sag. So, like, there's a good flow of communication coming out. But Mercury and Sag in detriment, as I've been talking about for a month now, means the details have not been looked at, and they can easily trip you up. Now, another thing really interesting, I don't want to go too much longer, Uranus right on the descendant in this chart, and also Jupiter very weak, retrograde in Gemini, detriment also. Both of these in the seventh house of open allies and open enemies. There is going to be surprises and shocks that could set things way back in relation to our allies and enemies over the next quarter to a year. Our allies are probably seeing us as this Uranus and Jupiter, that we've become unreliable, that we've become unstable, and that the only thing we're willing to keep giving them is more weaponry to blow each other up. Uranus, right? But that we're not reliable ourselves. And this shows that our allies could actually be being attacked during this time, that they could be being attacked by random acts of violence that we can't really control. So this is very, very interesting. This could be really shaking up a lot of our relationships with our allies and enemies over the next year. And once again, this is very worrisome in relation to the Mars and the Pluto and the Scorpio. Could we get ourselves deeply involved in a war? Very real possibility. Very, very real possibility here, you guys. So, got to be really careful about this. The ruler of that seventh house, by the way, is Venus in Aquarius. And down here in the third house, so that's actually in the sign that Uranus has the most affinity with. And so once again, it's showing that, you know, will probably back our allies up with a lot of technology, a lot of the weaponry that we are able to have. But we have to be really, really careful with this energy, because it's like, there's going to be new ways of having to deal with our allies and our enemies. That's basically what this is saying, that we're going to have to really figure out new ways of dealing with them. Now, one of the other things I wanted to mention too is that the moon. Let's see, I'm sorry, you guys, one sec here. Okay, yeah, I wanted to mention the sun actually first. The sun represents the president himself, and it's in the second house of the assets and money of the nation. And remember, he made a lot of promises. He's telling people, I won on groceries, right? He told all of us that. He was going to cut the gas price in half. All stuff that would be very valuable, put more money in the pockets of all of us. But here's the problem. It's at the bends of the nodal axis. So these are his ideas. The South Node is coming out of the 10th and in Libra. So he's trying to give people what they want. He's trying to find some, but the problem is the North Node is in the 4th house and it's conjunct Neptune. And that's showing that his plans, once again, he hasn't thought them through. They're not dealing with reality well. He's probably not going to be able to live up to these promises economically. And this could be really stressful for people. It could stress the economy right back on home, right here at home with the Neptune, North Node, and Saturn all in that 4th house. That could be really, really stressful for people and their families trying to get by. And it's where the energy came from. It's something that he really believes in. So, very, very interesting energy here, you guys. But, and once again, too, that Pluto down here, that does indicate transportation and education systems being completely reworked. Now, the one last thing I want to mention, I could go on this chart for a while. This is really intense too. There's actually a mutable grand cross going on. The moon in Virgo, which is the way that the people feel, is opposite Saturn and in a square with Jupiter and Mercury, that weak Mercury. So, talking about, and the work weak Jupiter too. So the moon in Virgo in the 10th house, the 10th house is the president's house again. And the people are very emotionally attached to what his plan is. They want to see these details. Well, what they're finding out, most likely what they're going to find out is that it's not going to be able to happen. That a lot of the decisions and plans that he made, that there's just too many restrictions that he hadn't thought through. The plans were very grandiose, but the details really weren't worked out. So this is like another indicator that there's going to be a lot of stress, that there's going to be a lot of problems coming at us, different angles from our enemies and our allies, from the way the people feel themselves, from broken promises from the executive branch to things that can't be instilled into the homeland just like that, because there's just tradition and law and things that have happened for years that you just can't unwind right away. So it's going to cause probably an incredible amount of stress, you guys. I really think, once again, we really am showing that, like, when you're not looking at the details of things and you just blow off your mouth, that it can create a lot of stress down the road for you, or in this case for a country. So I can't go on any longer. I could go on this chart probably for another 20 minutes, but you can see it's going to be a very challenging quarter and year for the US. All right, that's what I got for this week. Next week, we've got there's Mercury is going to get very involved with the Jupiter and Jupiter and Saturn will have their exact square, and Chiron is going to go direct. So we'll talk about all that stuff. I'm going to have my annual blog coming up too, and you do not want to miss that. It's going to just talk about what the outer planets do next year. Next year is a huge shift. 3 outer planets all changing signs and all involved with each other in aspects. So there's going to be a lot of shifts going on in the world next year. You do not want to miss my annual one. But next week, we will look at some of that other stuff. The week after, we've got a new moon, and then we're going to be doing the monthly for January. So somewhere in those 2 weeks, I'll be posting an annual blog too. So look out for that. All right, you guys, this is Matt Lutton. This is the Astrological Winds channel. Please become a follower of the blog on YouTube. Please pass the link along. Please check out my website. And if you need some help astrologically, I'm here. If you're a professional that needs daily or weekly or monthly help, I'm here for you too. I work on very much details. You need to get your chart done by a professional if you've never had it done. Anyone you know, and if you'd like to give a donation, here's that. If anybody's looking for classes or tutoring, get in touch with me also. Check the website out for the calendar and other information. Anybody who gives a donation, I appreciate you guys so much. Love working with all of you who I have worked with. And you all enjoy the solstice. I'll see you on the other side of that, and we'll see what's going on for Christmas week. All right. Take care now.